I will never forget that. You know, I went to his funeral. I remember when we told his the family the news and his mum. I remember being in the office and the scream when we told her that tore through the office. I remember turning to my manager and going, he's going to kill himself.
How does that strength or the idea come from that if I have to fight for or be their voice?
I don't think I can even express my level of frustration with these external agencies, how much this family has been let down time and time again. Mum has a dual diagnosis of complex PTSD and borderline personality disorder.
My bigger question is, how many of the people who are going through severe mental health issues and have people around them to advocate for them and then push the throttle very hard?
What happens when people don't have someone to fight for them? Don't ever overpromise. That's the worst thing anyone can do, because you don't want to let people down, and if you overpromise, you are going to let people down.
Before we get started, please subscribe so that you never miss an episode of our cutting-edge contemporary conversations. Thank you.
Welcome, Christina. How are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you for coming today and having this conversation. You have been working in the NDIS and disability space for long, community advocacy also on the side. But before we delve into that detailed work, I want you to share a bit of a background of yours, sort of your life story, and how have you grown up, and a bit about your family and your work experience, and how have you landed up in disabilities.
How much time do we have?
Let's have an open clock. I don't wear a watch.
I am one of 3 children. I've got a younger brother and a younger sister. My mum and dad, we grew up in Duncraigs. We've always been in the Perth area. Whole life I've always been quite active. I play netball, I dance, I'm quite creative. Went to local high schools, absolutely hated school, particularly in high school. Have always kind of had I suppose, empathetic nature about myself. I think I remember my friendships in school and, you know, even my adult life and even my adult friendships now, I think I'm always kind of the person that people will gravitate to or lean to. And I think that's kind of been part of what's led me to the career I'm on. I'm a single mum. I have a beautiful 9-year-old boy. He is the love of my life. It's quite funny. I think if he had not come along when he did, I don't know if I'd actually be sitting having this conversation with you right now. When I separated from his dad a couple of years ago, I just did not know what to do with my life. It was a very traumatic breakup, and I was really confused about where my life was headed. I was sitting with my mum one night, and I think I literally remember head hanging in my hands going, what am I doing? I'm a single mum. I don't know what to do anymore. My mum was like, oh, why don't you do the special needs education assistant course? And I was like, me? Mum, I don't know about that. I hadn't had a lot of, exposure to people with disabilities growing up. I was in Duncraig Primary School, middle class, economic area. We had one student, I think, in the whole of the primary school. Looking back, I believe he would have had an intellectual disability from my memory. Beautiful student. He was so lovely. I still remember him to this day. But that was really kind of my only interaction with anyone with a disability in my life, really. Mum was like, oh, but you'll get school holidays. All right, Mum. So I did the course and I went in, did my first prac, and I fell in love. I just was like, this is incredible. Working with the students in the classroom and helping them to, not only achieve their academic goals, but their social, emotional well-being goals. When they run up to you, Miss P, they used to call me Miss P, Miss P, look at what I made, look at what I did. And it was just nothing, I think, can touch your heart more than kind of the happiness on someone's face when you can see them achieving their goals.
Yeah.
So I did that. I did support work on weekends and things like that. to be honest, for extra income, but again, ended up loving it and thought, wow, this is really amazing, working with all these different people. There was a lot of people that I would work with on the weekends when I was kind of doing the community access and daily home living, seeing the struggles they were having about getting adequate supports, having regular contact with therapists, support coordinators, people who are meant to be kind of on the ball and making sure they're achieving their goals and have adequate equipment and things like that. And there was just a lot of gaps. Like, it was quite bizarre to me, to be completely honest. Like, I didn't know a lot about the industry at that time, but I was kind of sitting here going, this doesn't seem right. Where's all your supports? Ended up doing a lot of professional development, went into the SIL space, and from SIL landed in support coordination. And I think have just found my niche, have found that ability to advocate for people and bring that empathy and compassion that I think I've always had to a space that needs it, that needs genuine people who will fight for people who can't fight for themselves. So, yeah, that's the short-winded version, I think.
Wow, okay. So, a lot has happened. In terms of when you are interacting with this gradual growth from a conversation, having, being an early childhood teacher to doing advocacy, and in the last year or so, you have interacted with, to advocate for some families. You have interacted with multiple layers of the government and then multiple government departments, including the ministers also. So how does that strength or the idea come from that, if I have to fight for or be their voice, the understanding of things that, I have to write letters to multiple government departments, to the ministers, and how has that intent shown up in your life?
I mean, I think, for one, being a parent myself, you have just this innate sense of, I think, advocacy anyway, because when it comes to my son, I'm going to go for bat. So I think I can translate that to the people I work with, and particularly families. When I see families going through hard times, it's kind of like, oh, if that was me. When I used to work in schools, students might have engagement with government departments. So I actually started that kind of work even back then. We used to have agencies like SEND-B and SEND-D, School of Special Educational Needs, so the disability and behavioural branches. We used to have specialists coming in and things like that with some complex students I work with. So I would actually do a lot of advocacy for those students in that space, because we would get, behaviour plans and things like that the specialists would want us to implement. And I'd sit there and go, it does not suit this student. I work with them 5 days a week and you've spent 1 hour with them and I'm telling you this is not going to suit their needs, their learning style and that sort of thing. So early on, even though I didn't realise it back then, was advocacy, but that kind of has just grown and evolved as my career has gone. I've been fortunate that I've had a lot of mentors over the years. I've actually been really fortunate in some of the companies I've worked with that I've had some really great managers who, they would kind of give me a bit of this freedom, and I think they could see this is my passion and that sort of thing, and would, oversee, my reports and things in writing, but they definitely supported and helped me learn how to develop that professional writing skill and things like that, to go to ministers and things like that. So I've been quite fortunate in that way. But a lot of it has just been, I think self-taught and kind of learning the industry. And I think, in NDIS it's quite clear, everything needs to be factual. And I think that's the same when I'm writing to ministers and things like that. It just needs to be to the point, facts. So a lot of it has just been learning, getting feedback, taking, criticism and learning and evolving from there.
Shall I ask you to explore the last case study you worked on, and in terms of advocating for a family and the young person? So can you talk us through the last case study you have worked on? And
yeah, so I have a beautiful family I support. There's mum, 2 young children, adult children in the household as well. They have had engagement for years with DCP, child development services, intensive family support network, community mental health. There's been lots going on. I don't think I can even express my level of frustration with these external agencies, how much this family has been let down time and time again. Mum has openly expressed multiple times she wants help. She's open to having these services come in. She's not, against it. She actively says daily, I want help. Please come, please help. There was an incident earlier this year around Christmas time. Mum had quite a significant mental health deterioration. There was a few behavioural incidences. Myself and her treating psychologist at the time sent multiple letters to Midland Community Mental Health to have her assessed. They, I think, went out twice. Actually, I think even DCP went and assessed Mum and also wrote a supporting letter to Midland Mental Health. So there was three. There was three professionals in the community who said she needs to be assessed. Over the years, I don't know where the bipolar diagnosis came from, but Mum thought she'd been diagnosed with bipolar. So when we put in the referrals to Midland Mental Health, they said, she doesn't meet criteria for bipolar, so there's no role for mental health services. She has external stresses she needs to learn to manage. Sorry. This came from a social worker, not a qualified psychiatrist, not someone who has the adequate qualifications to make that determination on mental health. We got blocked from her accessing services. This meant she could not, we couldn't make sure she had appropriate medication. We could not go back to NDIS for more supports because we didn't have a confirmed diagnosis. The spiral effect it had, just from this social worker deciding they knew best. I went to Mum's local member and wrote a huge letter.
A member of state parliament, federal?
State. Wrote a massive letter, put all the emails in, all the evidence we'd submitted to Midland Mental Health and said this is not acceptable. I'm not sure exactly what the Minister's office did, but a couple of weeks later, and I'm so grateful for it, and I've said this many times to this office that I'm really grateful that they helped with this matter. We actually got an appointment with Midland Mental Health 2 appointments later, and Mum has a dual diagnosis of complex PTSD and borderline personality disorder. So imagine if that social worker had not blocked us 6 months ago, where we would be now. We would have been able to do a change of circumstances with NDIS sooner. We could have had Mum stabilised sooner with the correct medication. Why, I don't understand why that was allowed to happen. So I've sent multiple emails, inquiries to ministers. I've raised this with the Ombudsman now, that's not acceptable. If this has happened to one person, how many other people is this happening to? We have a massive mental health crisis. And if people are not even being able to be seen in the first place, it's just going to have that spiral-on effect, and it's just not acceptable.
My bigger question is, how many of the people who are going through severe mental health issues and have family with disabilities and kids with disabilities who they're caring for, how many will have people around them to advocate for them and then push the throttle very hard to achieve a bare minimum outcome, which should have been natural as part of the process. It should not be, which is an obvious thing to happen. How many of the people who are out there would have that kind of an advocacy support around them?
Who knows? I think we all know that there are a lot of providers out there who aren't providing the level of services that they should be. I think given, we have so many people in crisis, goes to show that there's not enough people advocating for them. We shouldn't have the level of mental health crisis that we do.
Can you also talk about, there's so many agencies involved in the same person's life.
Yes.
is that part of the problem? And the complexity of so many handovers and so many hand-holding, and then not just duplicacy of work, but beyond that, because one person's story, not just the old problem is telling your story multiple times, but the handing over of one case to the other person, and then people are responsible for a part of the life, not the whole. So I'm just diagnosing your mental health issues, not your domestic violence issues. For a child protection, that's a different department. So how has those silos worked and operated in that scenario? And how do you think that multi-agency problem should be solved?
I think the biggest...
Or a challenge?
Yeah, look, from my experience in this case, I think the biggest issue, it's not been the fact that there's been multiple people involved. I think it's the fact that there's just been this combative nature. And it kind of, I've organised case conferences, which really, as a support coordinator, is not my role, but someone needs to do it. So I've organised multiple case conferences that involved all these different agencies, and we, through these case conferences have been able to delegate, tasks and things, which is very helpful. But again, unless you have someone proactive organising things like this so that all these agencies can come together, things will fall off. But in this case, it's been every time I've been trying to be proactive and engage and collaborate, I'm just being stonewalled and people aren't doing their job, and I'm having to constantly follow up on things that aren't my role. And I think then in cases like this, it's almost like you need some sort of independent overarching case manager who does oversee then everyone, because, I'm working on billable time, so I can't do that. We've got IFS and DCP. Yes, they have case managers, but as you said, it's for the children. We've got mental health case managers, but that's for mum. It's almost like, you need some sort of independent body that needs to be established who would oversee all the people and maybe come to these case conferences and go, right, where's this at, where's this at, where's this at? Because there just seems to be this really combative nature where as soon as these external mainstream services know NDIS is involved, it's like, oh, NDIS will deal with it. It's like, no, that's not our role. It's not my role to be providing parenting support. That's for intensive family support. That's for DCP. It would just be so much more beneficial if people could see that if we actually had a more proactive and positive interactions with each other, that would improve the outcomes for the people we're supporting. But everyone just seems to want to pass the ball off, which is really difficult.
The kind of role you have within the NDIS whole stakeholders or the whole ecosystem is support coordination, which is highly sought after for service providers, because you are the front end of the you have individual plans in your control, and then you are trying to identify who is the right service provider for them. That's part of the role, and which means you get a lot of emails from a lot of service providers that look at me, I do this, look at me, I do this, can you refer to me?
That is, and I apologise for anyone who maybe does this, but it's my biggest pet peeve. I really do not like when I get a message on LinkedIn from someone saying, oh, I actually got one the other day. Hi, we're a new service provider. Let's look at ways maybe we can share referrals. No, absolutely not. That it's my pet peeve. So I notice, if I use, LinkedIn, if I am trying to find a specific person, I might need let's say I actually have to find a dietitian for a participant who needs to have training in peg feed management, things like that. So I might look on LinkedIn to see if there's anyone specific who matches that. And I just kind of noticed there's probably 4 or 5 big providers it's the same ones who comment on everything saying, we have capacity, we have capacity, we have capacity. Okay, you might, but...
Is it appropriate?
Yeah, no. And I find, I have gone to some of these providers before, and I remember once I needed a functional capacity assessment and one of these big providers, we can do it. This report came to me and it was the most poorly written. You could tell things had been copied and pasted. The person's name was completely different, so I could tell things have just been copied from another report. I basically rewrote the report and sent it back and said, can you please actually fix this and not charge our client either? It's very obvious which providers are looking at participants as financial commodities when they, act like that online, if that makes sense. Like I can see you're just chasing hours, KPIs, billables. You're not actually looking to provide tailored support to this person.
And what, in your observation in the local market, what kind of a referral proposals have you received? Anything not ethically right, or anything which you have met and felt, I don't know, it smells fishy here?
I think the biggest one, I haven't had any too concerning, but the ones for me are certainly a couple of new providers that have popped up, and it's that whole message of, how can we help each other out with referrals? And I'm like, that's not how this works. That concerns me. That's the attitude, or attitude's probably not the right word, but the idea that providers coming into this space think that the NDIS is about. It's like, this isn't a money-making, we're not selling coffee cups. These are people. And I can clearly see you're here for the money.
I think last week, in the Four Corners piece came on STA housing. I think they followed two organizations who were taking money from the investors to build STA homes on the east coast. And people have taken for a ride those investors' money and promised big returns. How do you see the housing space? I'll want to talk to Sil afterwards, but from an SDA point of view, what's your observation in terms of SDA providers and people who are having properties under their belt, or trying to create more properties and create investment opportunities?
The biggest thing I think I've noticed with SDA providers, or these houses being built, is they're not actually accessible. I've gone into, I've got a participant down in Wellard. So the owner, he built this house. It's got home automation and things like that. He was actually renting it out as an Airbnb, and then it's come over to SDA. You walk through the home. This gentleman is in a powered wheelchair. The walls are not wide enough for him. It's turned into a money-making scheme where people are building these houses. They've actually got no idea of the requirements that are needed for people living with disabilities to actually have an accessible home.
But they would have assessed the house for a level of assessment of the...
I'd love to know who's assessing these houses, because they're not. Like, you go into them and you just go, this is not suitable.
Because most of the properties who get registered with the NDIA as SDA properties, they should go through an assessment process.
They do,
so
yeah.
An independent SDA assessor.
Yeah, they should, but who is the SDA assessor, Okay. Like, I don't know, because I go into these houses and they're not suitable. There's a lot, and the other thing is as well, NDIS is not giving enough money in NDIS plans for people to actually access these homes. A lot of SDA homes are sitting vacant because the NDIS in the package for SDA, they're actually not awarding enough money to cover the expenses, that are needed for the SDA. So a lot of them are actually just sitting empty as well, is the other.
And
conundrum.
not everybody has SD in their plan.
No.
And you have to get assist, and then it's by court basis, what I understand.
Yes.
Coming to the different format of housing, which is SIL, which is supported independent living, and that's also another bone of contention by many providers. People want to have housing and have three bedroom, 3 people living in the same house, or 4 people living in the same house. How do you see that space in terms of being appropriate for the right people to be living in? And how do you identify who should be living together? So what's the assessment? One is that, and then one is accessibility, and people living together, and if they're multi-providers using the same house to come and do drop-in supports. How does that work in this highly complex space?
So as I mentioned earlier, I used to work as a SIL coordinator, and one thing from the company I used to work for, they were quite new at the time, and one of the things I remember mentioning to them, and I think has now become their practice, they would receive, referrals for people with SIL and just kind of dump whoever into a house. And it's like, you can't do that. I myself, if I want to go live with someone, I'm not going to go just walk into the house and be like, yeah, let's go. I want to know who I'm living with. Are we going to click? Let's go for coffee or, something, for these, vulnerable people, they have a right to have that same choice and control. But a lot of providers, I think, just will stick people in, not actually think about, I remember we had 2 gentlemen in a home. One was diagnosed with Down syndrome, and I think the other gentleman might have had autism from memory. And they got a referral for a third person who had severe schizophrenia, hallucinations, and they thought, let's put him in with these 2 really quiet, introverted gentlemen. What a mess that was. So, I don't know. That to me is a huge thing. If I go to a SIL provider and, if I've got a participant that is looking for a SIL property, I'll say, this is their interest, this is, their personality, can you tell me about the people that are living in the house, and things like that. Like, I want to know, and I'll feed that back to the family, if they're guardians or the participant, whoever it might be, and go, okay, these are the options, these are the people that are living here, let's maybe go see it. I find some SIL providers are like, no, like, do you want to come in or not? Do you want to sign the service agreement or not? It's like, come on. So that can be a little bit tricky, but I think, the SIL space, and I get it in a sense, you've gotten this house as a provider and you do need to fill it because otherwise you're losing money and things like that. But it's like, you can't just chuck people together and not have any consideration about their disabilities, how they're going to interact. You'd kind of almost think like, and especially therapists, right? It would be good if there was some sort of way to look at, here's 2 participants, they've actually got, therapists from the same company. So that would be a good way to then save money on therapy, because maybe they could come and bill then, half
together.
each. Yeah. So I'm like, there's creative ways that we could think about cost savings and things like that. But, I don't know how SIL providers could kind of do that. But SIL's a hard space. I remember I don't like drop-in supports. I know you have to sometimes. I had a really traumatic experience when I was a SIL provider. We had a young man living in a house in, I think it was Balcatta, maybe Balga, highly suicidal. And he came out of hospital. The hospital, literally, we said, these are some houses we've got available. You can take him to come look while we wait for his SIL funding to come in. Royal Perth Hospital, the social workers just left him at one of the houses. We were not prepared. We did not have supports in place. His plan was not sufficient to have the 24-hour, supports that he needed, kind of while we stabilized him. So we just had to kind of take him on and do it all very quickly. He was going to run out of funding, so the support coordinator said, just turn it to drop-in supports. And I remember turning to my manager and going, he's going to kill himself. We can't not. We have to do, like, can we do something? Can the business maybe cover it something? And it was just like, no, like, it is what it is kind of thing. Literally the next day, I get to the office. I'm getting a call from the support worker who was meant to be on shift. They're like, he's not answering. And I just knew, like, in my gut, I was like, he's gone. Hindsight's a funny thing. That this was a learning experience for me. I remember saying to my manager, I need to go, something's wrong. They let me go. They let me take the spare keys and go. Actually, no, there was no spare keys. That was the problem. We were looking for the lockbox. That's right. So they let me go. I get to the property with the support worker. We're on the property looking for the lockbox. Couldn't find it. All the doors were locked. There was a bathroom window that was open like this much. So we were actually trying to climb into the house. Thank God we didn't get in. We ended up calling police. Police went through and they said he had actually blocked all the vents and he'd gassed himself in the house overnight. So it was lucky we actually didn't get in because we could have been poisoned. That has really impacted me. And I think this is why I fight so hard, because I've seen what happens when people don't have someone to fight for them. I went to his funeral and I remember when we told his family the news and his mum. I remember being in the office and the scream when we told her that tore through the office. I will never forget it. I went to his funeral and his mum crying. Like, I will never forget that. And for me, a lot of my role that I do now is I really push for safety for support workers as well. Because, had the support worker walked in, had I walked in, like, that's something no one should walk in on, but it's a real risk in this industry. And I don't think people realise how much risk support workers are putting themselves in sometimes, especially with, participants who have these really high suicidal idealisations. So I've gone on a tangent, but SIL's a tricky space. I don't like drop-in models, but unfortunately sometimes we have no choice because NDIS does not look at people holistically and what they need. They just look at a disability and go, oh, this is all they need.
Thank you for sharing that story. I think it pushes you a bit more further, as in pushes you harder in terms of, your own mental health.
Yeah.
Because you're carrying that load, and I could see that load is being carried till date, and some form of responsibility, which creates that, pressure on oneself. Because mental health and psychosocial disabilities are probably being now segregated. That is not probably the NDIS is trying to move the psychosocial disability out of the portfolio of NDIS and move to mental health. But eventually it's all the same conversation. It's caring for people. Yeah. You can, divide the problem, but still the care has to happen. Yeah. It's a zero-sum game. Somebody has to pay for it, whether the state funding will happen or the federal funding. Yeah. You can move money from one budget to another budget. This might look like different, but eventually the care has to be delivered in some way or form. And you can suppress the problem probably, and it'll come out in much challenged way. But when you were working as a frontline, very client-centric conversations as a support worker and coordinators, how have you seen the quality and safeguarding standards? One is participant-centric, as you said. They are, but they are not a care worker-centric. So how can the quality safeguarding standards piece, How was your observation in terms of quality and safeguarding practices from a point of view of care worker?
Yeah, so it's really funny. Like, I know as a support worker, you know, when you get inducted, there's all these trainings you do.
Mm-hmm.
It's amazing to me. I don't know if companies are just not doing them. You know, I remember, when I kind of worked as a carer, and I remember one day in particular, I went to this woman's house and I got there and there were these two men there. They all kind of smelled of alcohol. I did not know that I had a right to refuse to enter and do the shift because, you know, those two gentlemen were there and they kind of seemed under the influence of alcohol. But, like, things like that, I don't think get told to support workers. Like, these little scenarios, like, I know we all kind of do safety, like, oh, you know, if the participant's on drugs, if, you know, the participant's on alcohol, but these kind of, like, little niche scenarios that happen. So I didn't know that, and it happened a few times and I felt quite uncomfortable with these gentlemen. And I think I mentioned something in passing to my manager, and my manager was like, oh, no, you should not be going in there. Like, you absolutely have a right to say, sorry, this shift can't proceed. And I was like, where is this information? Because it's not anywhere in any, you know, risk management or anything like that. The situation with the participant that passed away, I should not have been allowed to go to the house. The manager should have said to me, no, we need to call the support worker back to the office. Let's call police. Like, I should not have been allowed to go. That one's really bizarre. I had a support worker ring me the other day. So instead of going to her company, rang me and said, this participant is expressing, you know, some quite severe suicidal idealizations. I don't know what to do. I was like, what do you mean? And she was like, I don't know what to do. What do I say? And I say, you know, listen, empathise, do not offer advice because you're not a trained clinician. You can, you know, advise her to speak to her counsellor, contact her mental health coordinator, refer her to, you know, Lifeline, all these things. So even in that scenario, I'm going, where's your training? You've been placed with a high mental health participant, and you're ringing me to ask what you should do. Where's the training for staff? Where's the consideration to their safety? Where are people's risk management? You know, I think people are becoming really reliant on behaviour support plans. And not realising that, no, you still need to have, as a company, have your own safety protocols. Some companies I work with are fantastic and they do. They're great. You know, and there's a few companies that I've been like, hey, can I have a copy of yours so I can actually just do a generic one and share that with some support workers and things so they've got something. But, like, you know, there was that story a couple years ago, two support workers, and there was a gentleman that passed away. It was in Queensland. He choked. I think he had a swallowing protocol, food feeding protocol, something. He was at risk of choking. And I remember the story that the staff just said, oh, we never saw this plan. I don't know, companies don't seem to want to spend money training staff and ensuring they are up to date with risk management, safety protocols, basic plans that are being put in. It's really concerning, and this is how people die.
That's a very darker space to be in terms of, you know, because somebody has a disability and when you add mental health issues, it escalates the caregiving at a different scale. And that... not the behavior support plans are important and effective in many ways, and sometimes, you know, it's good for people who are caring for them to go through as and when they are moving up the ladder in terms of they're supporting more complex people. I think there has to be special, you know, layers or levels of support workers in terms of training, content and material to upskill them, because things sometimes, you know, things will happen.
And in those moments, in those high pressure moments, it's hard to think logically. Sometimes we just can't, we go into fight or flight mode and you just go, I'm doing what I think is appropriate. 8 times out of 10, most people would have enough common sense to make the right decision. But as you said, it's almost like these really high needs participants, there needs to be a really specialised, I think, training. And not just training in how to support the participants, but how to protect yourself as a carer. I know we all talk about self-care and, work-life balance and stuff, but I'm like, when you're working with these really complex people, I know myself, I take it on sometimes. Sometimes I find, I've had a really rough meeting or something and I'll sit in my car and I actually will physically go to try decompress myself. And I think a lot of people don't realise how important, and even that in itself needs to be a skill that kind of, I think, needs to be taught to people in this space, because we do take it on. It's heavy. Sometimes it's really heavy.
Do you think care workers who've been working with high complex clients for longer term will also have, the way you work in police for 20 years, for 30 years, you have PTSD post or stress and anxiety and some kind of a trauma. Do you think care workers are also at risk of these things developing in the future?
Absolutely. As you've mentioned before, myself, that incident I had, I carry it with me. To be fair, I've probably actually not processed it that well myself. I've probably not taken the time I needed to actually process that. But so that's one, incident I've dealt with on that level. People who are dealing every day, with these, participants who might have really significant behaviour, physical escalations, that there's sometimes people that have to be restrained, all sorts of really intense stuff. Like, of course that's going to impact you and leave a mark on you eventually. Eventually it's going to get to that point of becoming too much and you'll just be burnt out, and it's a lot to deal with.
And that probably would push people to leave the sector.
Yeah.
And in an already constrained workforce environment, when you can't find the right people, you might lose the good ones or the people who get fatigued or burned out through the process. In terms of, because NDIS covers young people to up till the age of 65, therapy is very heavy in the front end of the a lot of therapy plans, therapy in the plans for young people. How do you see the therapy model in terms of when you have multi-practitioners coming together and delivering care to a person versus an individual practitioner of allied health? And what's your observation on that?
When I love working with a group of therapists, I kind of prefer having therapists from different agencies. I think it allows for a bit more accountability. I think it allows for a bit more collaboration. I think, when you have people from different organisations coming together, you can really bounce some really cool ideas off each other, and it can be a really positive experience. I haven't had, a negative experience. When I work kind of one-on-one with a therapist, it can be good. Unfortunately, it actually just comes down to who you get sometimes, because I've had, even in one company, I've had therapists do great reports, great intervention, but a therapist from that same company I've kind of had to make a bit of a complaint about. It's the individual, it's their work ethic, it's their passion, it's their commitment to delivering good services. I don't think it matters too much whether it's a few therapists or one. It actually just depends on how well, as a support coordinator, I guess kind of leading the team, how well I can, get all the parties to work together. I'm a big advocate for, regular stakeholder meetings, depending on how much funding there is, but at least 2 per plan, so we can all kind of come together and go, where are things at? what are the challenges we're dealing with? Have we got some ideas for intervention and things like that? Because I think if people are just kind of left to their own, it's like, who's doing what? Who's in charge of this? Who's doing what? I think, you know, particularly OT and PBS around that kind of emotional regulation space, there can be quite a bit of overlap. So that's something I really like to do with the people I work with, if there is a multidisciplinary team, is really nail out who's responsible for who. If there is an overlap, you know, making sure we're using the same language, because if we've got a child, you know, if we're looking at like the zones of regulation, for example, and we're saying, oh, you know, that there's a program called Size of the Problem. So it's, you know, looking at reactions to the size of a problem. So when we're using programs like that for children, I think it's really important that all the therapists are across this program and the language being used. So we're not using different, you know, comments for the program, because it can be really confusing. So that can be, I think, sometimes a bit of a challenge when there are a lot of therapists involved. But if you have someone diligent coordinating, it should all still run quite smoothly.
NDIS has evolved in the last 12 plus years, 2012. 13 plus years, and very fast and very quickly. And the most recent changes also, and things are still changing. And the most recent address by the Minister for NDIS at the press club, he talked about a few things. What do you see the future of NDIS looking like? What are the big ticket items which are keeping you awake, and what are the opportunities you can see in that space?
I think I just need to preface and say, as a country, we actually are very lucky to have this scheme. I've gone overseas, you know, I went to America recently, and I spoke in a bar somewhere and just ended up speaking to this couple, and they're telling me how their child has cerebral palsy. And I was like, wow, what's that like here? And I remember the dad telling me he's working 3 jobs, barely sees his wife and child. You know, they have to cover all the costs, you know, the stress they were under. They were like, oh, you know, this is one night we've probably had off in 12 months, and we've had to, you know, plan so much. Like, you know, we've got both our parents there and this person available, you know, just so they can have a night off. And, you know, then they're like, oh, what's it like in Australia? And I'm like, oh, well, we have this thing called the NDIS, blah, blah, blah. And I'm telling them about it, and they're just like, your government pays for services? Like, they couldn't fathom it. And that really kind of gave me a really bit of a perspective, and went, do you know what? It's not perfect. We actually are lucky to have it. We're the only, I think, country in the world that has anything like it. I think there's 60 odd countries that are apparently coming to Australia to learn more about it. You know, 30 years ago, we were still institutionalising people with, you know, mental health and disability. So, you know, Australia as a nation, we're very far ahead, you know, compared to other parts of the world in supporting people with disabilities. So in saying that, it has problems. We all know that. I think it's so frustrating, because I think everyone on the ground can actually see the potential this scheme has to be such a phenomenal program that can be taken across the globe, and it's just not being executed right. You know, when it first launched, it was rushed. We're seeing that again with this Thriving Kids program, rushed. You know, the way, oh, we'll have it rolled out in a year. So, oh, this feels familiar. Everything that the government is trying to do to reduce the costs, because they are ballooning, it can't continue the way it is. The economy will collapse, the NDIS will implode. Like, it can't keep going the way it is. But the lens that they're looking at through, where it's just constantly cutting plans and costs to participants, everything's reactive. The $100 million fraud task force. Okay, a task force to investigate fraud. What about investing that money to building a system that stops it? That would save us $365 million a year. Why aren't we looking at other ways to reduce these costs that aren't just constantly cutting participants' plans. There's other things we can be doing, and the people, these decision makers, I don't know, they just don't seem to want to open up this dialogue with people. You know, there's people like you, myself, so many of us going, we have solutions, we have ideas, and they just don't seem to want to hear that. I don't know what's going on. I think the thing that keeps me up at night is the fact that all these changes basically just mean more fighting for me. You know, it's just like constant battles, constant arguing with planners, constant, you know, the level of evidence we need to provide. You know, I have a participant who she's diagnosed with cerebral palsy. I just spent 8 months going through the administration reviews tribunal. She's diagnosed with cerebral palsy. She has an intellectual disability. She's non-verbal. We had to go through ART to get her a new wheelchair. Mm-hmm. She's 16. Her last wheelchair she got, I think, when she was about 10 or 11, maybe 12. Mm-hmm. She physically has outgrown this chair. Why do we need to submit any more evidence than that? She's never going to get up and walk again. She's physically outgrown this chair. She needs a new wheelchair. Why do we have to do a 10-page report to justify that? Mm-hmm. Why did it then get rejected? Why did we then spend 8 months going through ART? What is it? I think it costs $6,000 per case that goes through. Mm-hmm. Yeah, something like that. So we just cost $6,000 to go through for them to turn around and go, yes, give this girl her wheelchair, for God's sakes. The common sense, I don't understand. You know, they're saying, oh, $2 billion on this Thriving Kids program. How about $2 billion spending into the NDIS and specialising streams, having planners undergo training to understand specific disabilities so that when a plan comes through, oh, primary disability can go to that stream. That planner picks it up. Okay, yes, I actually understand what I'm reading. Things like that I'm like, they're ideas that could make a difference, not just all these reactive programs that you keep throwing out without piloting, without testing. So we're going to have the Thriving Kids program rolled out in 12 months. Have we tested it? Have we... How are you assessing the eligibility? Autism's a spectrum. How are you going to decide what's mild and moderate? Mm-hmm. I don't know. I'm concerned. I like to believe that NDIS will get to where it needs to be, but not if the decision makers don't actually start listening to what's going on the ground.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to just shift the gear towards technology conversation. Because there's so much to be done and so much to be analyzed. Are you using AI as part of your workflow? And will AI take your job as a support coordinator?
I don't think it could take my job. People like face-to-face. I don't think it could. I think there's definitely room for AI to be integrated into this space for sure. I think what is probably concerning is, you know, programs like ChatGPT. I don't know what some of the other ones are, but, you know, you can kind of get a report and you can tell, you know, when AI's written it. And you know what's really concerning? Not concerning, well, yeah, it is a little concerning, is, you know, the reports that I see that I can tell have been, you know, probably just fixed up a bit.
From the caseworkers or from the care workers?
From therapists, from various parties. You know, you can kind of tell when it's been judged by AI. But it's really interesting that it's those reports that are coming back and getting appropriate plans. Mm-hmm. So I'm like, okay, why aren't we developing a system where, you know, like some sort of NDIS system where all providers, all therapists build into this portal for a person it would create more accountability if all providers had to use one, program, because then it's like no one can hide dodgy shifts, lacking case notes, there'd be a lot more accountability. If therapists are using these AI programs, and I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with that other than obviously the privacy, licensing, things like that, that's a grey area. I'm not a tech person. I don't know. I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with that kind of integrated technology. But if we're going to do that, why are we then billing, like a functional capacity assessment, I think, is about 10 hours.
Yeah. I'm keen to know more on how do you run this highly empathetic business in terms of you have to put all in. It's very emotive. And run this business and also be a parent. And how's life being a parent? And then what are your lessons for the last 9 years?
Yeah. 9 years. Gosh. I'm functioning, so no, look, it's definitely a tricky balance. I'm definitely having to try put more habits in for myself. I was falling into a little bit of a trap of he'd go to bed, my son, and then I'd be like, oh, I'll just take the laptop into bed and do some work. Next minute, it's 11 p.m. at night. So I've given myself a rule. I do not take the laptop into my room anymore. Absolutely not. When you log off, you log off. I think because I work from home, it's very easy to just be like, oh, I'll just quickly check some emails. Oh, I'm just having my coffee. I'll do this. And I've been finding up until I went on a trip a couple months ago, and up until then, I think I was just working from the minute I woke up to the minute I went to bed. And the whole idea of me going independent in part was also to have a better work-life balance for time with my son. And it wasn't till I kind of came back from my trip and my son actually said to me, Mum, you're always working. I thought you'd have more time for me. And I was kind of like, oh, that's a bit of a heartstring moment. But it's hard, and I definitely, need to put, more balance into it, and it's something I'm learning to do, and I'm putting more little regulation tools in for myself because, as I think I said earlier, in this job, you can carry it. And I used to be able to really kind of disconnect from carrying, emotions and things, but I think I've had a few things in my personal life the last couple of months, and a lot of what I've been going through is actually kind of being mirrored in some of the situations I'm dealing with. So it's kind of like I'm not actually getting a moment to process the things I'm dealing with because it's being confronted in lots of areas in my life, and it's just kind of like, oh my God. So it's so important, self-care, and I know that term gets thrown around a lot, but it really is very important. And I think it's actually really sweet. My son will, he asks me about my job and, people with disabilities, and, he said something to me once, Mum, what's an intellectual disability? And I said, well, it's when someone's, born, trying to explain this to I think he was 7 or 8 at the time. I said, it's someone who's born, their brain's a little bit different to mine and yours, and sometimes it means that they might not be able to speak, they might not be able to do things the way that you or I can. And, he sat there and he went, that would be really hard. I was like, yeah, it is. And he was like, so they might not be able to play sports and do things that I do. And I said, no, they don't sometimes. And he was like, wow, we have to be really kind then. And I was like, yeah, we do. So for me, I think I'd like to think I'm imparting, into the next generation of, accepting people and being kind and being empathetic, because we all have challenges and we all have things going on in our lives, whether you have a disability or you don't. We're all, we all have trauma, we all have things going on under the surface, and I think that's where my empathy for my job can come from. Like I think, you know, a lot of families that I'm dealing with who are going through domestic violence, who are going through, you know, trauma. I had a friend die very suddenly a couple of years ago. That was really hard. So I can really, I think, empathise with people. You know, I've experienced domestic violence myself. So I think my own experiences are kind of what drive me to support people, because I was really lucky. I had a family who supported me. I've had really strong networks of friends who I would not have got through the things that I went through without them by my side. And even since starting the business, you know, my group of friends that I have now, they've been so supportive, and I don't think I could have taken on this challenge without their, you know, help and even push, in a sense. Like my best friend was kind of one of the really strong advocates for me to go, Christina, you should be out on your own, you can do this, you know. So I'm really lucky that I've had all this love and support in my life, and I see my participants who are going through tough times, they don't, you know, have the networks that I've had. Like in a sense, I'm kind of the only person they've got, which, you know, that's a lot to carry sometimes. So it's really important for me sometimes to really try not take that on too much, because it's like I'm not Superman. I can't solve all the problems. I will try my damn best to. But sometimes I can't. And as I think a very empathetic person, like that weighs on me if I can't fix the problem. So it's a skill I need to learn to balance. I'm not perfect.
And that's the challenge of the role is, you know, to disconnect. Because how much ever people might want to say that, you know, you leave your, you know, your problems when you walk out of the door, or all that, you know, the work-life balance. But how can you, we are all are humans as one piece. We can't segregate our brain into our emotions and differently, because our work is very emotive, or as you interact with people, it's very confronting in many ways and form. And sometimes things escalate and you can project that. And then that's frustrating, which I can observe that when you were telling stories of your clients earlier, that it's frustrating that you know this will happen and you've predicted that will happen. You've been telling people that might happen, and then it happens.
Yeah.
And then you just, it's just as a bystander, you don't have control on things.
Yeah.
And that's fairly frustrating and challenging for sure. In conclusion, I want you to share a bit more of your personal beyond self-care. What is there a spiritual practice you believe in? Is there a internal process? How do you keep on going if somebody is on this path? And how do you push forward all the time, every time?
Gosh, that's a good question. I'm not a overtly religious person. I believe we all have our callings. I believe there's higher powers that, you know, guide us on our paths and things like that. I think it's just knowing, for me, it's knowing if I'm not in the corner for these people, who's going to be? And I think the best thing that I can do for them is show up with empathy and compassion and realistic expectations, and knowing that I will be there to advocate for them. I think, you know, the biggest thing for me is to step back though for myself and go, you can't solve everything. Don't ever overpromise. That's the worst thing anyone can do. Because you don't want to let people down, and if you overpromise, you are going to let people down. And that's where trust gets broken. And I think kind to yourself and everyone else, and just know you've done the best you can. If I can go to sleep at night knowing there's nothing more I could have done in this situation. There's nothing more I could have done for this person. That helps. It's hard when there's situations that have happened, you know, that I've talked about earlier, and, you know, you kind of sit there going, oh, could I have done this differently? Could I have done that differently? Maybe, but it's also like a reality of sometimes you could have done things differently, but the outcome might have been the same. You know, that young man I spoke about, whilst it breaks my heart still to this day, I've kind of been able to come to terms with the fact that, you know, even if maybe we hadn't dropped to the drop-in model and things like that, I think he severely, you know, did not want to be here. And that's hard to accept, but I don't think there's anything else I could have done in that situation. And I think that's really important as providers when you genuinely, because some people aren't genuine, but when you genuinely know in your heart of hearts you did everything you possibly could have, then you've done your job, and that's all you can do at the end of the day. And it's really hard, but just empathy, compassion, not just for participants but for yourself as well, is really important.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing the stories and these conversations.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.